Hey, I'm edxi. Today I am taking over Chair Breaker's IG Live and for the rest of the week. Today I'm going to be joined by my friend Pat, and we're going to be talking about body positivity and bodily autonomy. um, just gonna wait on him to come through. Hello everyone that I don't really know. Welcome to the conversation. I'm excited to hi Zena. Hello. Some familiar faces. Um yeah, so today we're just gonna try to, I guess, have some conversation about bodies, and it's also Black August too, and I really want to yeah. Oh, here's my friend. Let's see. Awesome. Let's see if it connects us. Hey.
Hey,
What's up?
how's it going?
Good. How's your day been?
It's been good. I'm very tired though, because I've been up since 5:30. How about
Oof.
you?
Also tired because I just haven't been getting a lot of sleep because just anxiety and the world and all the things. Yeah. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah,
Do I
can you?
sound like I'm underwater?
No, you sound
Okay.
very audible. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. How's puppy?
Meatball, come here. Come here.
Meatball. Oh,
He's
cute.
good. Just
Yeah.
anxiously attached to me.
Word, yeah. I think that's happening with a lot of animals and their like partners. Like they're just freaking out whenever they are
Yeah.
leaving the house. Yeah, it's like I don't know what that is. What does that mean? You would know.
I mean, I with Meatball in particular because I rescued him during COVID times, and he
Mm.
hasn't had a home for 4 years out of his 6 years. I think he's like very much like you're my guy. I know you say like he knows, even though Amita also got
Mm.
him at the same time, he knows it was me.
Mm-hmm.
He's getting better, but I think he's really spoiled because he thinks like the way I've been home is the way it's always going to be. So
Yeah.
for him, he's like, well, yeah, wouldn't you be here 24/7, not go anywhere, or occasionally?
Right.
But now he's adjusting to the fact I'm leaving the house more, and he's like, wait, what the fuck? So
Oh.
he's still adjusting. But I think
It,
dogs like us. Like they're like, why do you leave all the time? Like we're supposed to be
right.
together.
Yeah. Puppy. um. Yeah, so I definitely wanted you to be in this conversation because I think we had a really, yeah, we've talked about this before about like what we do with our bodies is up to us, and but I guess I want to start off the conversation with a question. Um yeah, just what do you think is the threat to your and other people's bodily autonomy and body positivity, like, I guess, yeah.
Like so, what is the threat? I mean, man, there's
I mean, there's
there.
a lot of threats, but like, what would you say your major one was just growing up? Yeah, just like being in your body as a kid.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting, and we've had these discussions in rants, and for folks who don't know, Edzi and I toured briefly with my, I guess now defunct, because I haven't done anything with it, company Buff Butch, which was really great and was really fun. And I think it surprised people because we were always talking about, you know, how do you use fitness as a tool of liberation, especially since it has been turned into this tool of just really oppression through many,
Mm-hmm.
many facets, which I won't go into because I can go for like hours ranting about it. But in terms of myself as a child, so I'm a mixed race, black, trans person, man, identify as man. So I was raised with my white family as a quote unquote girl. So I think that automatically is the threat to my own body autonomy. Not only was it, and like I'm, let me state this, like I had a lot of freedom as a child. Like I was able
Mm-hmm.
to wear, quote unquote boys clothing. My sister, who's also queer, also wore boys clothing. But there were certain times where we did still have to get dressed up. I particularly remember like wanting boys underwear and not being able to have that. Like that was the restriction. I think there's something so interesting about, something around a child's genitalia. It restricts what type of underwear they can have. And I don't think it was intentional, but we have been so coerced into thinking like, this is what you're born, this is what you get, even when there's like freedom. But also the particular violence of like being mixed race and being black and being raised to be white, and so
Mm-hmm.
much of even as I was understanding I wanted to be masculine, and as a child like wanted to grow up to be a man, the image that I had in my head was like the white men that were around me versus the black man who fathered me, who was not as present. And so many, not that any body part is ever gendered, but this is me speaking of my own experience, my own definitions, and really coming to terms with it. I had a lot of issues with like my lips. Like I thought my lips were feminine. I have black lips, like they're full. Like it has nothing to do
Mm-hmm.
with that. But I was around like white men who had
Right.
like,
No
so I
lipsicals.
yeah, so
Yeah.
I was like, this makes me feminine. Or butts. I would think like a
Mm-hmm.
butt is feminine when like literally like your ass is the powerhouse. So, like
Mm-hmm.
depending on your stature and the way you're built, like I come from shorter, stockier people on my dad's side. So like we do have booties. And that has nothing to do with masculinity. So I think there was like a dual issue. I like to call it like racial dysphoria as well, as like really trying to figure out who I was. And I was really like intuitively as a child very proud of being black. I never wanted to straighten my hair. There were things that like were always, for whatever reason, I think my ancestors were whispering like, you know who you are, be proud, know this. But I still had to contend with all the weird messaging that I was getting around me, even if it wasn't
Right.
intentional. Um, so yeah, I mean, like that's just those two existences always are automatically a threat. Like to even think of like what is the classification of femininity and masculinity, and also understanding that classification is dependent on every individual and can be crafted however the hell you want it to be.
Right.
And
Mm-hmm.
obviously, society does not want us to know that and does not want us to have that freedom and wants to restrict that even further of like what is manhood, and that definition of
Mm.
manhood is always through the lens of white supremacy.
Right, right. Yeah, no, I mean, just speaking of white supremacy and anti-Blackness and like these structures that are very much like facilitated by the nation state, I think like as far as I'm concerned, when I think about everyone's bodily autonomy, I think about, or even body positivity, I think so much the police existing as an organized force of violence, and the state also in the same way existing in an organized kind of formulations of different violences, like it comes to the court or the police or even our healthcare, even the medical industrial complex, which is also born from anti-Blackness. I feel like these kinds of things have consistently, from their inception, have always been this kind of threat to our bodily autonomy, as well as like how we perceive ourselves to be. Um, and I think I would hope that more conversations on like just how you view yourself can center why we might have body issue or like body image issues, or why we might have internalized some of these notions of like, you know, what a man's supposed to look like, what a woman's supposed to look like, and really center the causation of that. Like there's actual structures that exist that have um, we've been socialized within and have caused us to think in these kinds of ways. Um, for me, I think growing up was a little different. I did grow up around a lot of black folks, and a lot of my cousins were black, and you know, it was like there was definitely colorism. Me and my older sisters had a kind of yeah, we did. There was like benefits and like because of like, you know, who we were, and I think um just my father being like a man who's like you know, a mixed race man himself was also something that he didn't really like explain to us that his grandmother was an indigenous person, you know, and I think like in so many, it was the 90s, and I think like also like he wasn't really trying to push us to be black, you know, like it wasn't really like a he was also a police officer, which explains a lot for me and my kind of feelings about police officers these days. But yeah, like, and then on my mother's side, my mother was always trying to convince, like, acknowledge being an Asian, would always get my sisters Asian Barbie and like, which I actually wanted to play with and did play with low key. Um, but yeah, like I think there's a lot of things that threaten who we are and who we're supposed to be, and I think well, just seeing conversations on like body positivity and bodily autonomy, it's like, well, the number one thing for me that's a threat to all of our bodies is the state. We didn't necessarily consent to the state having so much authority over our bodies so directly. If we break the law or break these kinds of I don't know, stratified like fantasy, like white fantasies that become like law and order, and we break them, then like what, we're captured, and what does that mean for us as like already a captured, you know, population in relation to our the history of slavery and all that. So I just, yeah, I like to expand yeah, what it means, you know. But I think the thing that we were talking about a while ago was like uh we were talking oh, so I have a consultation um for, it's just gender confirmation surgery, and I was talking to you about feeling like a kind of way about like how so much of gender confirmation is like it's very racialized, as well as um yeah, it can be really racialized because so much of it has to do with like your head shape and like similarly with body and everything. It's, I wonder how, yeah, just was like asking you how you were dealing with that, and like how, I don't know, yeah, how you were dealing with those like feels of like, oh, I'm a black person, but like is something what I'm doing going to perpetuate some weird like stereotype, or I'm gonna be less black, or I'm gonna be less of a man, you know, like, is there, what's your experiences with that?
You went out a little bit on the audio,
Oh,
though. I did hear what you're saying, but you suddenly got like farther away.
okay. Can you hear me now?
Yep, got you there.
Okay.
Before I jump to that one, I wanted to say something about what you were saying about the state. I think it is also interesting to just think about in terms of black bodies, and then also, I guess, Latinx bodies, especially because they're also criminalized, especially in a place like Los Angeles. But I don't like and I especially know you don't like using the term black and brown, so I'm just gonna leave it there. But
we can delve into that and why. Yeah, but
that will be another.
yeah.
So just thinking about like even when people break the law as laid down by this white supremacist government, that so often it is Black and Latinx, Indigenous folks who pay for it with their bodies versus white folks who pay for it often with their money. Like they spend a little bit of time and they get off, and what happens to us? Like we don't even get an opportunity to make a possible bail, right? Like they know, like, oh, we got you. Like we're putting you to work. Like even in our punishment, we're always viewed as our bodies and the commodity that our bodies can give, whether that's like even as an athlete, like, yo, as a boxer, like I'm not gonna like shy away from the fact of like battle royales were a thing that like came from this. You know, this is all part of it. The fact when I weigh in, like I am just in my skivvies, you know, standing there flexing, like I know what those are. Like I understand that. And just even thinking about like who is exotified and whose body is seen as like sexual, like so much of who we are as people is only valued at what we can physically produce, whether it's the look at us, our dancing, our singing, whatever it is. Like so often, so much of us is our bodies. And I think that is a lot of the work we have to do, especially as Black folks who are descended from enslaved African folks, of just really trying to reclaim, like, this is my body. Like, if I choose to do this, even though I know that these are in line with what white supremacy only values in me, like this is for me, this is for my joy, this is for my agency. And I think that's a constant battle that we as like the descendants of enslaved people have to constantly navigate. And I don't feel like we talk enough about the just the strain, like even when we're doing things of joy, that so often they're seen through a lens where we're being commodified just by what our bodies can produce.
Right.
So I wanted to add that in before I talk about the other thing. So I know we were talking about surgeries and just even my own like history of what terms I use to identify myself as. Like I think I first was like, oh, I'm genderqueer. Then it was like I'm transmasculine. Then a trans man. Now I'm like I'm a man who happens to be trans. And it really took me being okay with, like, do I want these things? Do these identifications feel right? Because I have been conditioned in this current setting and society that, like, oh yeah, I'm a binary man, or like everything that lines up with me is like the identity of a man. And you know, I'm like, I feel like I have to do so much work that I'm like, this isn't something I want to spend so much time ripping apart and second guessing myself. Like, I do enough of that with so many other things. All I know is that I feel better and more aligned when I call myself a man. I feel better and more aligned that I had top surgery. I feel better and more aligned that I am seeking bottom surgery. And honestly, that's enough for me. If people have their critique, I don't really care. It's my body.
Right,
like
yeah.
I'm the one that ultimately lives in this flesh. I'm the one that ultimately has to deal with dysphoria. If there is a way for me to navigate around the dysphoria or at least lessen it, because unfortunately it never goes away. There's not going to be some day where I'm going to have all the surgeries and look a certain way and feel like, oh, good, I'm done. Like I'm never going to feel gender dysphoria. And that's a really big burden to carry. Like I think for people who don't experience dysphoria, just how much headspace it takes up. Like, you know, just the fact that your whole day can be ruined and you can be like spiraling down just from like one small thing of someone misgendering you on the phone or catching yourself in a certain light in the mirror and being like, oh shit, like I'm seeing all these things again that didn't feel right for me. So I think ultimately we have to use our own happiness as the barometer of it and really indicate like, okay, like there may be some things, there may be some conditioning around us in this world, but I also don't think it's possible for us to undo every little thing that has been planted in us that's problematic. Like, I just don't think it's possible. I think you really just got to weigh out, like, will this make me happy? If the answer is yes, then go for it, all in.
Yeah.
You know, that's where I'm at with it.
I think to me, I'm always trying to think of Like, will this perpetuate oppression? Will me doing this in some form or fashion? And I just want to acknowledge, like, to all the people who will watch this and are watching this, I think it's really important. We're trans people. We can talk about surgeries. Like, we're like, but in the instance where you think that it's a good idea to talk about somebody's whatever, don't, because there's so many other things that tend to be obscured because of this conversation of, like, surgery. And it's like, I do want to remind people that, like, Black trans people specifically are in a state of crisis, because, in the last 2 months there have been like 20 deaths of not only just Black trans women and Black trans femmes, but also including Black trans men in that conversation. So yeah, but the reason why I wanted to bring this up in this, because this page is particularly geared towards people who want to be in their body, and, like, it's easy to be in your body and be positive when the world is consistently telling you that you're attracted, or, you meet all the kind of standards of conventional attraction. And I guess I wanted to, yeah, I guess I wanted to acknowledge that, like, they're the things that people are doing to make themselves feel whole. They should do that. They should do that, but understand, like, it doesn't seem like that's the end. There's a lot of spiritual work that I think people need to do, in order to feel completely, whole, or in their judge. I feel like I'm still on that path to, like, seeing myself and getting a good feeling, because, like, when dysphoria hits, it hits really hard, and it's really uh debilitating, like, and that's sometimes these are things that's all we can actually think about, is, like, how we're being perceived, or, like, it's really hard. So that being said, I think that for trans people, especially Black trans people, uh we hold we hold this kind of really interesting position, especially right now, regarding how much uh, we have to resist the kinds of the world, how the world kind of constructs these kinds of ideas of who we are, who we're supposed to be, and we really have to, like, give birth to ourselves and deny and reject, all of these. All of these kinds of impositions. And I think, yeah, it's like, I don't even know. um, it's like to imagine, like, what it would be like for trans people to live, and, like, just, be able to be whoever the hell they wanted to be, or all people for that matter. Like, there is a lot of restrictions that cisgendered, people put upon themselves, because of their own kinds of belief in gender norms. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I feel like we as trans people, especially like Black trans people, end up being in such an opposition to what is considered normal, because that's always under a cis white normative scale, right? So then when literally white people look at us, and I think this is where some of the fascination comes from, is they're like,
Mm,
wow, you're you're rebelling against us and choosing to be yourself. And
mm-hmm.
what I don't understand when I look at white people, I'm like, how do you not realize that the construction of whiteness hurts you? Like, yeah, it's not the same pain that, like, you or me experience, but I don't understand how they don't realize white supremacy is a prison to themselves. The fact the construction of whiteness is the absence of anything. Like,
Mm,
I look at like blackness is like so full. There is such curiosity of what can be there. Whiteness is a blank slate. There's nothing there. And I feel like that sums up white supremacy. They've erased their own culture. Like,
mm,
as someone who is Irish, like on my mom's side, I have watched that family become white. I hear like our stories. My grandmother's grandfather fled Ireland when he was just a boy, and because all the men had been murdered by the British during colonization, and he at like 10 or 12 years old murdered a British soldier in retaliation and was sent away.
mm,
And I'm like, that's our history. Our history was like we were colonized, we lost our language. My last family member that spoke Gaelic was my great uncle, and he passed away. Like, they don't even have those roots anymore. Like, this is also the crime of white supremacy. It hurts white people. You don't even have your own roots to turn back into. You're stuck in this structure, and that's why we see so much white violence. Like, looking
mm,
at white cisgender straight men who are just like, oh, I'm rejected, I'm going to murder you. Like, that is your
right.
response. Like, that is not a natural response, and that is a common white response we're seeing over and over again. And how they don't understand how they poisoned themselves, well, they poisoned this land and poisoned all of us. I will never understand why people who quote unquote benefit from these structures don't realize how rigidly they're holding them in.
Right. I feel like there's the stereotypes that a lot of people a lot of people have, black people being lazy and yeah, you could, the list goes on of like certain people like to smell to like, but like I feel like the stereotype for white people unfortunately is when I mean at least now at least like for me, when I'm in larger spaces, when there aren't very many white people and a white person steps in, I'm kind of like, there's the stereotype is that they're just more likely to kill everybody in the room, unfortunately. Like, or, it's like statistically, like you're more likely to commit genocide against like a group of people. That's just like literally the stereotype. And I would agree that like when it comes to the culture, like whiteness, white culture, I feel like it's really, really it's like, yeah, like people are supposed to be viewing that as some sort of benefit when in actuality it's really sad that it does what you said, like it kind of like separates themselves from each other and kind of creates this kind of white solipsistic like narcissism that's all that is like this idea that all they need is themselves or all they need is their money and their coin and that's it, and like that yeah, like I could imagine that can be very a kind of hollow existence, and it also tends to emancipate itself from the earth, like from the land, which is really interesting, like when you think about global white supremacy, um and how it reifies itself. It's like part of the awfulness of it of this globalization is forcing indigenous people to detach themselves from the land that they belong. Yeah, like if whether it's uh literally capturing and enslaving and thingifying black people or indigenous African people and bringing them here, or coercing indigenous people here in Turtle Island to you know, uh, just disregard their customs, not really follow through in their beliefs to outlaw these kinds of ceremonies and culture, and then what to impose this kind of lack of culture and lack of connection and lack of interdependency for industrialization, and that's really the biggest thing that I try to, like I've been to talks where literally like there would be somebody with like a shirt on that's like that, like I know what like a red Iron Cross shirt means when I see somebody with, that's like a nod to fascism, and they're coming to see me speak, and like I'm just like, as much as you hate some black and indigenous people, brown, so-called brown people, we'll talk about the brownness soon. But like how it's wild because like we're not really socialized to hate. We're socialized to fear, to
Hmm.
not fear. They're definitely, I think the
Be
difference is,
wary.
yeah, is always tends to be the fact that they have a history of power. They have like white industrial power is responsible for the kind of degradation of the earth, the land, and the people who, had real relationships to it. And yeah, it's like that. Is that supremacy? Like, are you like supreme if like y'all don't really have any history or culture to fall back on? Like I think it's wild. But before I forget, the thing about brownness, um, well, I think brownness is interesting because often people are like, yeah, brown bodies and like brown lives matter even, and I feel like the world isn't brown isn't like a cohesive political identity. And I've said this in like online before, how like there there's different kinds of brown people. Like there like Filipino, Indian, Indigenous, Native American, there's so many different kinds of brown people, but when you say black, you do understand that like phenotypically and historically it's of the African diaspora, whereas that doesn't really apply to brown people. And I think that it is kind of like a co-optation almost of like uh how I think it's anti-blackness. I really do. I think that when people are saying brown lives matter or unapologetically brown, or like things like I want to see, I'm rooting for all brown people, co-opting the kinds of slogans or the kinds of like things that black people are putting out. I think that that's a testament to how, yeah, just how there's nothing really sacred for black people. People can just pick apart and like, grab, it's like a grab bag, it's like, oh, I like twerking, I'm a twerk, without acknowledging that like, twerking goes way back. Twerking, is something our ancestors were doing that we brought, back, somehow, of all the things that we could bring out to these lands, we brought back, so-called like what is called twerking. And I think it's fascinating that everybody just feels inclined to take some of these things that black people in their bodies have held as sacred, and then, what does it mean? It's like, even with like some of my indigenous relatives, I'm like, there's a lot of appropriation, cultural appropriation that is, stems from anti-blackness. It's like, do you know any black people in your spaces, or are these exchange actually being made? Is there like an actual cultural exchange with like your slang and your like how you using your words? Like, I don't like saying African American vernacular. It's very liberal to me. I think I liked when we were calling it Ebonics, and there was like an entire science behind about Ebonics and sounding Black, like, and what that comes from in terms of, African diaspora and our roots. We say people can say certain things in certain ways that it's inherent. It's ties to where we're from. So when people are like using hood speak or what have you, it's kind of like, like, are you from there? Like, or it was it shared? Were you raised in that? And yeah, I just think that there's when it comes to cultural appropriation, I think it has a lot to do with that, with like how Black people view, or how Black people are viewed by society at large. Um, yeah, I guess
Like
I was
what's
trying. Uh-huh.
Oh, sorry. I think that what ends up happening is like, and this is this interesting thing about this concept of like global anti-Blackness and looking at where when Black folks were taken into various places, what end up being their roles, and I think we're producers. So why wouldn't people think that they can consume what we produce? Like that is primarily
Mm-hmm.
been our role, like in looking at just speaking of the United States. Like we literally built this fucking country, like, and I'm not speaking of like Turtle Island and the people there. I'm talking about like the US of A, like this country, the structures
Mm-hmm.
that are this country. We built it, like the labor of our family built this with a very heavy price that we have not been atoned for, like at all, even close to
No.
in any proximity. Not even just, I mean, even if you're just thinking of like financial, but not even speaking about like the spiritual and emotional wounds from not knowing your people. And I think that's something that is very unique to Blackness, is most people, even when they've come a different way, like you have some way of finding out who your people are. That to me is the deepest wound, is like I can't trace back. I know a generic reason, but I don't know my people.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I know my mom's people. I can go down that road. Even when they've separated themselves from their own culture, they can return back to it. When I try my best to even try to return back to that culture, I'm making guesses. I'm making very
Mm.
bumbling guesses in a land that is very foreign to me and has been made even more foreign by the structures to be that have continued to like remove Black Americans who were kidnapped from Africa, from the people who now grow up on the continent. And that's something that can never be really repaired. And what can you actually do to pay back a spiritual wound that deep? Like, I don't have answers to that, but I would like
Right.
some coin in the meantime to figure it out.
Yeah. I mean, the that's really interesting. These are conversations that I'm having with other indigenous people, as well as other Afro-Indigenous peoples right now, because Afro-Indigenous peoples are very concerned that when Indigenous people are saying land back, they ain't meaning Black people,
Mm-hmm.
because like even like throughout the globe, like even in Africa, for because of anti-Blackness, it's that kind of it's not synonymous. Blackness isn't synonymous with indigeneity. It's very, it's the opposite. It's like it means detachment of land. It means like that we don't actually know what what nation or land or region we came from, because of slavery as this like long-term racial and relational dynamic. But I think it's interesting that people don't um, acknowledge Black people being indigenous, because like how like if you are thinking about slaves and you are thinking about their lives, I would imagine that other than each other, other than relying and respecting and loving one another, I mean I can't actually imagine it, but I would say that it's wild that people would detach Blackness from indigeneity when we have Black people have historically tilled the lands. And it's like, if there's anything that Black people would know and grow relationship to, it's the kinds of crops that that they're farming cotton, you know, like having like a that historical relationship to this plant, to these specific plants, um, that is connection.
Yeah.
That is building, you know, like not probably more than they would have with white people with their masters. So I think it's fascinating that anyone would reject the notion that black would mean anything other than indigenous, especially because I've seen a lot of people be like, you know, settlers step down. That includes black people, and it's like, whoa, you know, like, whoa, you know, let's acknowledge that black folks are captive population of people still, and that the slave codes and the constitution that said that we were three-fifths a person, that all still exists. So we can't we can't like talk about real autonomy, real bodily autonomy, real ability to think positive of yourself if these structures are still standing.
Yeah.
And why are they? By the way, I'm like,
Yeah.
why are they still standing?
Because it's so because the conditioning has been so extreme. And you know, I
Yo,
think we also just examining, and I have like been, you know, privileged to have shared conversation with Indigenous American folks who are like, no, you are indigenous of this land. Like you weren't, like you were brought here and you became part of it because you were stewards of this land.
mm,
Unfortunately, are rarer though to find those conversations. Um, but I think also to think about, like, you know, settlers, one, that is insulting. Like
mm,
my mother's family, even through the coercion of colonization, they still had some sort of a choice to come over here and ascend to something else. And I understand, like, being American and being in this global like powerhouse is a complicated, you know, just thing in comparison to
right.
other places in terms of what's there. But you know, where are we as like enslaved people supposed to go back when we are queer and trans? Because the colonization has not ended
Mm,
on the continent, and the missions did not end on the
mhm.
continent, and they have made it violent for us. If we were to return there,
Oof.
what life is there for
Yeah.
us? You know, like, where am I supposed to go exactly? There is nowhere else for me but this land that my father's family were stewards of, whether they consented to it or not. They still grew things from this land, and that is a relationship. They nurtured parts of this land, even if it was through violence. They brought life through it. And I think that's a lot of like the
Mm,
Black resiliency, is to always be able to conjure life even from this violence. And we are the prime examples of that. Like, we are still
mhm.
here, we still have joy, like we still have all these things despite all the violence that comes from it. And I think that's, you know, like the Black superpower, right? You know, and unfortunately that power is not infinite and does run out for certain people. um
Mm,
but you know, to go back, just thinking about body positivity and thinking about the land, like all of this is so connected. And you know, we've had conversations about this. A lot of my work has been moving towards a liberation practice that is anti-capitalistic, because to be in a capitalistic structure means to do harm to your body. We are supposed to work absurd amount of time behind computers, sitting in positions we were not meant to sit in, um, for money to feed ourselves. Often the food that is accessible to us is not food that we are accustomed to. We have inherited such a violent land and violent environment to just our own individual bodies and our own health. Like, we
right.
know that stress kills people. We know this,
Mhm.
and yet where are we having the conversations about Black trans people having access to quality water, having access to rest, having access to quality food, having access to movement? You know, just thinking about people, we know that movement is essential because we are people who were made to walk around and do things. Like, these are parts of us. And then be like, but to be a Black trans femme walking the streets, like gonna go out for my casual walk, that can be a death sentence. Like, we aren't talking about how this accumulates. And even when it isn't a violent act, it is violence that causes early deaths. Like, I remember seeing, oh God, I'm blanking on the documentary I was watching with you at that one space. Um,
Major.
Yes, yes, yes. And like they were showing all the people who've passed away, and the vast
Mm.
majority of them did not die from violence. They died
Mm-mm.
from cancer, they died from diabetes, they died from heart disease. And I don't want to codify this into some sort
Mm.
of body composition thing because it's not. Like, it's not about body composition, it's about quality of life and stress and having
Right.
access to the things that will make your body feel like a human animal. Like, we are of this nature, we are of this earth, we are animals, we are no different. I look at my dog,
Mm-mm.
he naps all the time, he's swole as fuck because all he does is sleep, run around, and have joy. Like, that's his secret. You know, we
Mm-hmm.
looking at any animal, like cats, they sleep a lot. Like, that's because we should be resting all the time. Like, 8 hours, fuck that 8 hours, you may need 10, 12. Like, you know, it
Yeah.
shouldn't be set up in this structure. And the fact that we are expected to exist in this construction that is actually the antithetical of what we are as people. It removes us from nature. You know, you were talking, I think we've had discussions about sleep, and that's something I've been really into, and
Mm.
using light. Our bodies, not only our eyes, but our skin responds to the sun. The fact that I have overhead lights on right now is probably going to disrupt my sleep because my body goes, oh, overhead light means there's sun.
Mm.
Like, our bodies haven't evolved enough to know what we've suddenly thrust upon us. That we live in this incredibly artificial world. And maybe we'll adapt to it later, but in the meantime, we're not. And what does that do, especially to very vulnerable populations that don't have access to course correct? You know,
Yeah.
this is the issue. This is a genocide. And, you know, just how can we be positive in our body when we've created an ecosystem that is so toxic, like in all the ways? Like, there is no separation between mind, body, and spirit. We're one fucking entity. And we really like to, in the Western culture, especially in America,
Mm-hmm.
to really think about my body
Them
is
being
something else,
separate.
and my
Right.
mind is something else, and my spirit is something else. Guess what? You're one fucking person. We're all one integrated, very complex organism that needs all of these things met at once, or at least, you know, in some sort of like flowing state. We work in cycles. Unless we really start to get at the heart of it, and instead of focusing on like fitness trends and diets, of really like, okay, like, what did I do originally? And not in like a paleo type of bullshit way, because that, like, who cavemen actually got their vegetables from eating the guts of animals. No one's doing that. You know, it's like none of that stuff makes
Not
sense.
yet.
Yeah, I
I
mean,
mean,
not yet, right?
the end is coming. The end is
I
nigh.
think we may have to go back to those practices.
Oh.
But just really, like, I mean, for people, just going out in the sun often makes us feel better. Like,
Hmm.
animals lay out in the sun, things grow in the sun. There's a reason we are connected. We need, pretty much everything needs water. We need water. Like, these are things very simple. We need some movement, you know, just moving around. We need community. That's so important. Like, community and relationships. We are communal creatures. These are part of all of our health practices. And if we're so, especially because, you know, I'm in the fitness industry, so I'm always pushing back against it. But we're so focus on, like, did I work out for an hour today? Like, who cares? Like, honestly,
Hmm.
in the grand scheme of it, it's not as important as really taking care of yourself and honoring yourself as like a being of this planet. Like, we
Hmm.
are vessels of this planet. And I'm not even thinking about just stewardship. I feel like stewardship is us paying back for the life that this planet gives. And how can we even have stewardship
Hmm.
when we're so out of alignment in these concrete jungles?
Yes, yes, exactly. And I think that's what the I think that's what the earth I think that's what she's giving. She's like, y'all, like, need to come back. You need to start acknowledging your the greatest mother, you know, that's like the great, you know, mother, you know, it's like how how can we acknowledge how can we acknowledge her? How can we acknowledge the things that are actually giving us life if like we're having to consistently work and be run down because of this work, because of like this hustle, because of this money, you know. And like I think I want I guess what you were just saying regarding violence and like how a lot of trans people internalize a lot of the violence that whether it be people gaslighting us about our genders or their very attraction to us, or like it's a lot to go through. And I think that yeah, there's the stat that says 35 is typically the age that Black trans women live to. And I that like you were saying before, that isn't just our deaths by the hands of um, usually cis hetero men, often Black men. That's also because of the kinds of diseases that stress induces and everything. And just wanting to think about, or just kind of transform our relationship to gender, or to violence, to economies of violence, and how economies of violence are so pervasive that we don't really think about um, even the violence of the police being something that it's ever present. And what I mean by that is, like, we're all colonization coerces us all to participate in, the 9 to 5, the grind, having to get your money, and then paying rent. If you don't pay rent, what happens? What actually happens? What's happening right now in terms of global pandemic within Los Angeles itself? People are being threatened with the violence of the police if they don't have the money to work. But at the same time, during pandemic right now, the state and the city is like, you're not allowed to leave your house, but you still have to pay rent. How it's already backwards as it is to pay to have to survive, but it's also like, can we confront this? Can we reject this? Can we actually live in a way where we don't have to do backbreaking labor just like our ancestors in order to, facilitate our life, to get scraps? And I think I'm thinking, yeah, we're not collectively having these conversations, and when we do, it's seen as like, terrorist organ, like it's seen as like a terrorist act, or like even organizing, or radical, if we're getting down to like how pervasive the violence of the police is, or the state is. Having to pay our rent, being threatened with police violence if we don't work, being threatened with police violence if we don't go to school, if you don't get a good education. What happens, right? You're houseless. You're then criminalized because of your poverty and your houselessness. And I think those are the things that, like, I'm hoping more and more people start to question in this kind of moment. Like, there's a moment, happening right now. And also, when it comes to these uprisings that have just happened and are still happening, more people have died by the hands of the police than, like especially when it comes to young people who have died. It's in the hundreds. It's over the hundreds now. Young people have been killed and martyred, as it is acknowledged, because being in the streets and resisting against the state as it is. And all we can talk about right now is what president we want to get hit. Like, we the conversation needs to shift fast, because these white supremacists, or these people who are afraid of losing their power and their role in civil society, they're not going to just let that slide. And I just think, like, what are we doing to prepare ourselves for those things, those kinds of tension? Like, the tensions are already here, and they are a threat to our bodies, our lives. I honestly don't really like right now. I'm in a place where I do want to have a consultation regarding my gender, but I also, or gender confirmation, but I also am just like, where am I at? What is it worth in the here and the now? Could I be doing something? Do I care about that when it really comes down to the threat of the police and the growing threat of state surveillance bureaucracy, because it is growing, and there's different kinds of organizations that I just shared. One of my friends articles on this subject of people who are using radical prison abolitionist rhetoric to then create policy that does the complete opposite of what it's actually supposed to do, actually criminalizes sex workers, actually advances the stalker state, the surveillance state, and militarization. And I remember Erin Lang was talking about like what we're up against. And she's talked about like we're not just up against white supremacy and all of these things. It's literal spiritual wickedness that is spiritually wicked to sit out here, give us face, and be like, we're here for the people, abolish the police, blah, 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 and then turn around and fund some shit that strengthens the things that we're fucking fighting against. That's spiritual wickedness. Like, it's really wild. And if you're watching, please look at the stories. I just posted this article. It's damning evidence, especially when it comes to a firm's history of like shaming sex workers, shaming and stigmatizing, people who can't opt out of like these specific institution, or who can't opt in actually into institutions because of the transphobic economy that exists. Yeah, but we have very little time now, and yeah, we really got into it, and it's like,
That's usually what
is
happens.
it
Yeah.
worth it?
It's just like, this is the topic, and
I'm here reporting live from colonial dystopia. Like, you are not free. You don't consent to the police. You don't consent to the genders that they assign to you. You don't consent to shit, y'all. Like, you better revolt. Anyway, I guess I want to look at some of the comments. Hey, Ashley. Hey, Jay. Hey, people. I guess questions in the last like few. I don't even know how long. We probably have like 3 minutes, I want to say. Does anyone have any? Oh no, we literally have 2 minutes. It's a
do we have a
two
hard
minute
stop?
countdown, huh?
Is that a hard stop?
It is, yeah. It just kind of cuts out with
Oh,
it,
okay.
yeah.
I
So
don't
we
know
have
how this
like,
works. I've never done it before.
yeah. I'll say something fun like, "You stay classy, IG live," and then it'll just cut out.
So
But
it
what
gives
are
you
your
a
last?
warning?
Well, I can give you the warning. I'm getting a countdown.
Wait, we're being asked if we're going to do more IG lives together.
Together, I only do this when I take over other people's pages. So literally, I don't really do lives on my own damn page.
So who's out there that wants to give
But yeah,
edxi their page?
I no. Maybe on someone else's page. I feel more inclined to step out of my comfort zone. But any last thoughts in the last minute that we have together?
Yeah, I mean, I guess ultimately where I come back to in terms of like where I feel my contribution and work is, because I'm not that person out there on the front lines doing that work. Just in particular of like, I want to see these conversation and liberation spaces. Like, I've been talking to so many people who are in the thick of it, right now, and trying to remind them like, hey, if we're really invested in unthrowing all of these things, then that means we also have to undo and overthrow all the ways we treat our bodies. Because we are our bodies. Like, this is part of the work. Our bodies are part of the work, and it's not about defining your body or anything like that, but just more of like, you know, because
we got 10 seconds, Pat. I'm sorry to cut you off,
but practice whatever you want to do, but I'm like, try to make sure really listen, like,